Hello everyone, and welcome to Whitetail Driven Solutions YouTube channel. We are bringing you tips, strategies, and tactics to help you and your property be more successful. We not only invite you to subscribe to our channel, but also hit the notification button to be notified when we release new videos. You always hear everybody say, I always hear anyway, I hear a lot of clients, I hear a lot of table talk, I guess I'll call it, that you can't have, your bedding area can't be too dense. Just make it thick and it can't be too dense. That is one of the biggest things, the most misleading pieces of information that I hear pretty much across the table, year after year after year. So what I'd like to touch on is the density of these bedding areas that you're making. It has to be diverse. It has to have these high stem counts that you hear everybody talking about. It has to have the right browse. It has to be able to fulfill a whitetail's intake per region. That changes as far as the intake of their daily diet. So across the board from where we're at here in Michigan, across the pond into Wisconsin, into Minnesota, what you'll see is those daily intake, the browse percentages can actually go up to 85 and 90%. So there's a lot of power in that browse. I actually just posted a link to a gentleman that's got some red osier dogwood for sale, and it has to be the right browse within these areas. So how does that tie to the density? Like I said, you hear these rumors and these fads, and it can't be too dense, and just make it thick. And what you're creating by doing that is, one, the fear that I have when I see that on these parcels is, the biggest thing to me is if it's too thick, the deer don't move through this freely. And what you're doing is you're by having it too thick and creating an area that's so dense that a mature deer in velvet, let's say in the early season, in that September time, August, September, doesn't want to be in there because it's too thick. He's hitting that velvet, the horns, the antlers are so sensitive at that point, he doesn't want to be in there. So that's one of the things that ties into it. The next thing that ties into it is by having it so thick that there's no separation and having it kind of all run together. What you create is these this doe habitat. You're going to see these doe numbers outrun your property, and the reason is it's a super place for fawning grounds. What comes with that, though, the best fawning grounds are oftentimes the best predator habitat. When that fawning season takes in, you're going to have you could have an influx of predators. Now going into late season, when those deer go back into those bedding areas because of they're looking for that side cover and that density of these bedding areas, it works the same way. The predator, the volume of the predators, they like that thick, dense area just as much as those deer like using it for bedding areas. Now if we had this conversation with a gentleman the other day, if you're looking out west and you're predator hunting in these wide open fields, because that is what these coyotes, let's say, are used to roaming in. But here in our area, they're used to hunting in these thick, overcrowded, high stem count brush piles, tipped over trees. That's what a coyote here in Michigan strives on, let's say, and that's what you don't want to. There's a limit of how thick it should be in the correct density on these parcels. So what I try to do in these bedding areas is to get the correct density, is to be able to, you have to promote diversion. You have to promote an edge. You have to promote separation. But you have to get these areas where you can separate with a thick, higher stem count versus an area where you may have a hinge cut or something like that that's a little more open. What I like to do is try to get this separation. So you have the separation from your buck bedding areas, from your doe bedding areas. Do not believe the age-old saying, and I hear it time and time again, that the density of a bedding area can't be thick enough. Get it just as thick as you can. These areas these deer have to be able to move, and that's why sometimes I catch some slack about promoting a low hinge cut, because people say that the deer should be able to go underneath a hinge cut. And to me, it's two different things. What you're creating with a hinge cut in these bedding areas is you want that browse, more browse, the right browse, the correct browse, low enough so a deer can be able to use that as their intake. So when you do these high hinge cuts, it creates an area where these deer can go at the edge of the stump. Let's say if it's 6 foot tall, they can funnel through there. So guys say that you have to open this up, you know, to be able to do that. To me, you cut those hinge cuts and make them hinge cuts lower, and they're going to be able to eat off that growth from that first, let's say it's a 60 foot tall tree. They're going to be able to use 50 feet of that tree instead of just the top third that's laying on the ground. So I can see the theory about raising them hinge cuts up so to create these corridors, let's say, or these funnels underneath these low hinge cut areas, these trees. But that's not, it's a two separate situations. The one, like going back to a couple videos that I've done, is these high hinge cuts, guys, are dangerous. You need to take them out of the equation, get that density down lower on the ground, and we've touched on this before, but the height of a deer when they're in a bedded position is probably 12, 14, 16 inches. So if you're taking that low profile, a deer does not need high protection from the sky above. You know, a conifer here and there that they can use to kind of, you know, break that heavy snowfall or something. Yes, they will use it, but they're not looking for the thick canopy to protect them from the snowfall. They're looking for side cover to protect them from the side winds, or the winds to get it in behind. So don't, like I said, you know, going back on that topic, don't get caught in this trap of believing that these bedding areas can't be too thick. You know, just thicken them up as thick as you possibly. They have to be able to feel secure. They have to be able to bed in an area that they can see. They have to be able to, especially a mature buck. Now these does during fawning season, they'll go through and they want to be in these thick areas. They want to be in something with a canopy. They want to hide those fawns. That's a motherly instinct, and that's how they operate. But like I'm saying, is going into, you can't physically change that every year on your property to have great fawning grounds and then have great cover in the fall. You can't physically go in there every year and take that and create it, you know, destroy it and create it every year. So you have to do is you have to create it in a way that they can use it both without bumping your doe numbers through the roof. So you're promoting the capability or the want of a mature buck to be in those areas. Now, if it's the logger's mentality that goes in and you just select cut an entire area and you go through and maybe that's what your property needs, and like I said, that's great, but then you have to come back through and you have to create these pockets of these bedding areas, not a 10-acre bedding area, half-acre bedding areas, quarter-acre bedding areas, separated by switchgrass, separated by, you know, a lot of these places what they need, I see, is they need one of these mulching heads to come in off one of these skid steers or a forester mulcher, come in and create a 30-yard barrier, something that you can get that light in between the bedding area and your corridor that you're hunting, or your transition area that you're hunting. It not only acts as a wall for you to use that to get in and out of your stands, it actually creates separation for bedding areas. They have to be able to see out of it. They have to be able to feel comfortable. It can't be too thick that it's a predator trap, and you have to be able, these deer want to be able to maneuver. They have to be able to maneuver to and from, and during that 24-hour period, or when they're in that bedding, that sequence that they're in that first and second feeding of the day, they may get up, feed, go 10 yards, bed back down again. They may get up, feed, go 20 yards, bed back down again. But if it's too dense, where if they're in there and when they get up to move, they move, what you'll see is they'll move out of that thick area. They'll use those thick areas more as a protection as far as weather than they will a bedding area. So the more that you create these areas and the thicker you make these core areas, your core area is so dense, what you're doing is, I find, is you're pressuring these bedding areas further and further to the outside of that area. Then what happens is when you're trying to hunt those, like on an evening sit, when you're walking in the daylight and you don't have the protection of darkness, and you're walking in on an evening sit and you're trying to get, when it gets, you know, the end of October, that first week of November, and you're trying to push the situation, you know, to get in tight, what I find is those core areas where you feel that it's thick and nasty, where those deer are going to be bedded, they're not going to be bedded in there. They're going to be bedded to the outside of it. And what happens is on their way to the stand, now you're blowing deer out because they're in an area where they can see their downwind side, they can see upwind for maybe 100 yards, and they're in these areas where it's dense enough that they have protection, but it's not too dense that they feel like they can't get out in an emergency. I get asked all the time is what do I recommend and how do I create these bedding areas so they're not too thick. What I like to do, guys, is I have a hub style design that I've created and that we've kind of coined, I guess, if you will. And once you see them, if you were to walk on a parcel that we have created, just the feel and the flow in a bedding area when you use this hub style design that we have, or that I implemented. But what it is, guys, it's as simple as laying your hand on your bedding area. Find that bedding area that you need, that you want to promote in the right area, and lay your hand on that. And on an aerial situation, lay your hand on it and create that center hub as the hub in a corridor area that you feel that you can hunt. Now, if you're 40-50 yards from that area, that's fine. But that you have to, I like to create these hubs for that reason, is because if you lay your hand on that map and your center is the hub and you go up through and you create all these corridors, what that does is it creates like 4 or 5 passageways through each bedding area, and you can connect them right side by side by side. So you might have a corridor every 20, 40, 50, 60 yards, depending on the density. But in that area, what you do is, if a lot of these areas that I create are like and I'll put some pictures up here so this kind of makes more sense, but a lot of these little bedding areas that we do might be a half acre or an acre. So what we do is we go in and I make this hub style design. So from the center of the hub to the top of the bedding area may be an acre is 208 by 208, so it may be 208 feet or 200 and some feet from the top of it to the bottom. What I like to do is in the center of that, then after these corridors are created, I go in the center and we create a arch that connects all those together. So not only do you have these corridors running through the bedding area that are a couple 100 feet long, you also have this center connecting points. What that does, now instead of having one hinge cut square bedding area, now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pockets within that acre bedding area. What is a great idea to do is a great tip to have done. If you can find someone, and we've got the guys with them that I have do ours, but if you can get a mulching head, I like a drum. I like this mulching head drum effect that you get, that it's right to the ground. And it's a clear path, that way you don't have a bunch of brush piles. But anyway, go through and open those corridors up, create them with this, if it is that thick, create them with this machine. Go back in behind those and seed those down, whether that's a frost seeding or a seeding in the spring of the year after the snow's gone. Go through and seed those areas to native grass. So what you're doing, guys, is you're creating side cover. There's no food value in it. It's side cover, and it creates a dense noise barrier between that bedding area and your stand location, especially if it's a tree stand location where you have to be able to climb up that stand with it's great to say that there's a lot of there's stands out there that you're using that are completely soundproof and they don't make any noise, but there's very, very few out there that don't snap or pop or bang or something on the way up. Bringing your bow up, clings against the step, something like that. So any of that sound that you can deter or create a barrier between that and your bedding area when you're trying to push the limits there just a little bit, that is where these walls of switchgrass, cave-in rock comes in. So as you can see, it's another piece of the puzzle that needs to fit, but do not get caught in this trap of believing that a bedding area can't be too thick. That's one of the biggest things that I go into, that people set their stands up around and they just know that that's thick and that's nasty and it might have some cattails and it might have been a clear cut from years ago, and it's just, yep, that's where the focus is. You can go around those areas, especially this time of the year when the snow settles down here a little bit. You can go around those fringe of those areas, especially if it has contour, and that's where you're going to see these bedding areas. If you're going into an area, if you go in to do postseason scouting, and this bedding sign is around these bedding areas that you thought they were bedding in, your bedding area is too thick. There's a piece of the puzzle that is missing in those bedding areas. Usually it's too thick, and it's a feed increment that's not being handled correctly. So you have to be able to go in there. That's where hinge cutting comes in. That's where opening those bedding areas up, getting the right trees hinge cut down. But if it's that thick, you probably don't need hinge cut. You probably need just the opposite. You probably need a situation where you need to get one of these mulching heads in there and you need to open it up. So that's kind of my take on these bedding areas that a lot of guys in the industry that have worked on parcels that I'm now going in on and taking a peek on why they're not working, is that's one of the biggest things that I see, especially this time of the year where I can really pinpoint bedding areas. And I'll show you some pictures here. This is exactly what happens. It's too thick. They do not feel like they can exit. They can, in an emergency situation where something comes in as a hunter that they can't get away from, or a mature buck does come into those areas and they can't move freely without feeling trapped, feeling cornered. It has to be open, but it has to be the right density within those bedding areas. So kind of look at your bedding area the next time that you're in there. That's something that maybe you've created, or something that you're adding on to, or something that you want to try to enhance this year. Really, before you start going in there and hinge cutting, make sure that it's not a situation where you're doing the wrong step. Maybe it's a situation where you need to thin it out, not promote more hinge cutting.